Welcome into a new edition of the Front Office. I'm Tony Lombardi, joined by my colleagues Dev Panchwagh and Brian McFarland. Fellas, it's been a minute. How you guys doing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good, great. Not enough to talk about, right? So plenty of stuff happening.
All
Yeah,
right.
it's been
Well,
a little slow at this point. You got the Crosby stuff and then the Hendrickson stuff, and then it just kind of died for an off season. It's about as slow as I can remember.
yeah, and you would think that when they restructured Lamar, created some cap space, and the Max Crosby thing fell through, that they might be a little busier in free agency. But I don't know. I think the entire league has been a little bit slow with this, and maybe this is just a new pattern amongst GMs that they're going to wait to the next wave of free agency if it wasn't those A-type players that they wanted, and just let it play out. Like the Calais Campbells of the world, and we'll get to talking about him a little bit later. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It did seem like, there was the first wave of, and obviously you have the tampering period, the legal tampering period, and everything gets done then. But it seemed like there wasn't a second wave of free agency. Usually, it seems like the second week there's still a bunch of signings, and that next level, and it didn't seem to happen this year. And I think you might be right. I think teams, the Ravens were obviously at the forefront of it, but teams are real cognizant of the comp picks now. So,
Yeah,
and they were going to wait and wait it out, and and then that at that point, it's just wait and see. And now we're after the draft, but we still haven't. I mean, there hasn't been much of it. I guess there've been some signings this week, but nothing major certainly. But I guess there's nobody
yeah,
left, maybe.
yeah. And I wonder if that's part of it too. The teams are waiting for the draft versus before they would load up in free agency. And if you look at it, there's a ton of quality veterans still out there. They're not great, but like they're Clownies of the world. They've had, and he typically waits, but I think maybe it would be an interesting thing to look back like 5, 10 years ago to free agency to see what was still out there post June besides the cuts, right? And how much talent, like a guy like Jawan Jennings is a good example. Like he should have been signed by now. I know he's asking for a lot of money, but maybe that's it. Teams just don't want to spend the money. They'd rather draft.
Brian, have you ever noticed that, or if you maybe track some of this data, that whereby maybe waiting behooves a player a little bit more? For instance, let's say there's an injury in training camp, and suddenly what was perceived as not being a need for a team now all of a sudden becomes a glaring need. And so there's a guy out there that fits that hole that has just recently developed, and maybe they get more money waiting. They skip part of training camp and all these OTAs that they don't really want to participate in anyway, and end up making some more money. Is that something that happens?
I think for a good amount of guys, once you reach a certain point, if you don't get picked up before the draft or right after the draft, at that point, you might as well sit it out and not just take the best offer, which you think is not a great offer, because that same offer, the cap space for teams isn't going anywhere at this point for most teams. I mean, they got their budget set. If they've got cap space to spend on you now, I mean, they would probably wait, so you're not probably losing a deal necessarily, but you're right. You could, especially quarterbacks, certainly, but you could end up because of injuries. You could end up getting picking up a plum spot because somebody gets hurt. And I mean, I think that's why Clowney's always stayed out there. And obviously, I don't think he's a guy that loves training camp too much either. But that's all. I mean, he's signed in July pretty much, I think, every year these days. So maybe not 2 years ago with Carolina, but certainly last year with the Cowboys and the year before, the deals before with us. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some value for guys. And as you said, they get to sit out training camp, and as they're especially older guys, a little bit of that wear and tear, they don't mind. And as long as the team feels you're going to come into camp in shape, then teams don't really mind that much either.
Brian, you mentioned that it's kind of a quiet time, and I agree. But amongst the things we're going to discuss tonight, we'll talk a little bit about the draft, some player signings that the Ravens have dived into, a few other developments related to the Ravens, remaining needs, and of course, with Brian being here, the current cap situation. But let's start off with the draft, and it's nearly 2 weeks in the books. I wasn't a huge fan of last year's number one draft pick, Malachi Starks, when it happened. We'll see how it plays out. I thought he had a subpar rookie season, but that's not what I want to discuss right now. But what I do want to discuss is the first round pick that the Ravens did make. His name is Venga. I'm trying to get this right. Ioane.
You want to say the whole name, the whole first
Ioane.
name now.
Oh no, I'm going to skip that part. So, so he was a first round pick, and my immediate knee jerk reaction was solid pick. It was the pick that seemed to make a lot of sense for the Ravens. It was a safe pick, and it addressed the glaring need on the team. The thing that kind of brings it uh, where there's some question marks around it is that Reuben Bain was still there on the board. And the other thing that bothered me a tad about it, and you could probably speak to this, Brian, is that because he's an offensive lineman, he may travel the same financial path that Tyler Linderbaum did that saw him run out of town because that fifth year number, if he ends up, if Wenger ends up being a Pro Bowler a couple of years during those first 4 years, is going to be a big number for that fifth year option. The Ravens chose not to exercise that with Tyler Linderbaum, so that was a thought of mine that they could go down that same path with Wenger and be out of another first round pick. Your thoughts on that and on passing on Reuben Bain?
Yeah, I mean, Wenger always seemed like the guy who was going to be the guy. Obviously, Bain falling a little bit was unexpected. I don't think he could go wrong, to be honest with you. I mean, I think they both would have been home run picks. So, obviously already having Hendrickson here, that's helpful. Having drafted Mike Green last year, that's helpful. From the pass rush standpoint. But my way of looking at it, I would have taken Venga too over the two. I did just guard was such a glaring issue last year, and you know, Lamar's your franchise, and they've proven if you can keep him upright and healthy, that the Ravens are going to score points. I think the defense will be better under Minter. Obviously that's a fingers crossed that maybe that's a leap of faith, but so I think Venga was the right pick there. But like I said, if they picked Bain, I would not have been upset at all. Um, as far as the fifth year option thing, I that doesn't concern me as much with a guard because well, I mean, obviously Linderbaum's deal skewed center out. I don't even know how far out. I mean, it's crazy that number. But the difference between center and offensive tackle it was monstrous, I guess I'll say, before the Linderbaum deal. But the difference between guard and offensive tackle, which is usually the number that drives that fifth year option, is is not as much. I also, let's face it, there weren't many great centers in the AFC, so Linderbaum was pretty much a shoe-in to be Pro Bowl, which is what bumped that fifth year option number up, because once you hit one, you get the transition tag. Once you hit two, you get the franchise tag. Um, Guard's going to be a little harder for, even if Venga's really good, like we hope. It's going to be harder for him to be. He's not going. I mean, I would be shocked even if he has a great year if he makes the Pro Bowl his rookie year. It's just because they're just other good guards out there, and he's not going to necessarily have the name recognition. Whereas there weren't really any great centers in the AFC. So for those reasons, I'm not. It doesn't worry me as much. Um, it does, I do think, create for them, and I would assume that they've learned this time, but it creates an urgency there that once that if he is headed towards the franchise number on the fifth year option, that they've got that once he's eligible after his third year, they got to get it done then. You can't let it fester. You can't let it get to the point where you have to make that decision. You get him done before that. Now, obviously, it takes two to tango. And but again, I don't think guard. I mean, who expected Linderbaum to go through the roof like that, other than his agent? I don't think his agent expected it to go that high. So I think it's incumbent on them if it gets before it gets to that point to make sure it's done, and a deal is done. But I don't think it'll be as much of an issue this time around. Just because again, I'm not even sure he's going to get to two Pro Bowls in his first 3 years, and yeah, I hope he's that good. I mean it's not a bad decision to have to make because that means he was a home run pick. But I think it's going to be harder to get to that point.
Well, plus there's twice as many guards
Right.
so as there are
Mhm.
centers, so that
Right.
makes the competition for that Pro Bowl spot even more difficult. Now, Dev, you mentioned off air that you were looking at different combinations. In other words, if they had taken Bain, who may have been that combination uh, offensive guard that they could have taken in that second round, you know, instead of doing it the way they did.
Mhm.
So, what are your thoughts on that in terms of what that combination could have been, and what that combination might have been versus what the combination is that the Ravens got with the guard edge rusher?
Yeah, so that's the other interesting aspect of this is because they went with Venga, they went with Zion, and you got that combination. Whereas if you and it worked out because Bain is the direct comparison to that position that they needed to fill out edge. So you go Bain, one would think you come in and maybe you take Emmanuel Pregnon because that's who was available at pick 45. So the top flight guards ahead of Pregnon went. So that's something else to think about. And there was, in my opinion, a bit of distance between Venga and those guards, even though those guards are quality prospects. And Pregnon is an older prospect too, something else to consider. So just the fact that it's not just Bain, right? Like it's Bain plus, Emmanuel Pregnon. I would much rather personally have Venga and Zion Young. And Zion Young, for me, he was my one of my favorite players in the entire draft. So I'm a bit biased, but I just think his game really lends to what they need. And also to Brian's point, you look at Mike Green from last year. You look at they picked up Trey Hendrickson. I think he complements that room really, really well. And one other thing to think about, I had this note as well with Bain. I personally feel like there was a higher risk tolerance that any team would have to have for taking him. There's just no there. I don't think there's any precedence for a player having the arms being the length that his are, which they're the shortest, I think, for a player of that productivity. So you're gonna have to. Tampa Bay is gonna. I mean, take him at 15. That's fine, but know that you will have to be comfortable with that risk. And I think and I could be wrong about this, guys, but James Harrison's name was brought up. Like, there's not a ton of guys, even, and Harrison wasn't drafted high. So it's like not even a ton of guys that have been very, very good, like Pro Bowl level players, with that holding them back. So Wenger to me was a safer pick, too. You are going to have a great floor. He should be a really good pass blocking guard at bare minimum. And I think with his work ethic and his work ethic and his mentality, him being a tone setter the way he is, I think he's going to be a great player in this league. So, but yeah, that the other thing, it's not just one pick, combination of two, three picks as well.
You mentioned that Zion was one of your favorite guys that was on the board, and you're glad to see that he's a Raven. But I want to get your both of your opinions on these categories. What do you think was the Ravens' best pick? We'll start with Brian.
Hmm. Um, I mean, it's hard to say the first round pick is the best pick, but that's the one I'm most excited about, obviously. Um, I
Well, it's
think
nice.
I
It's
would
nice
think
to
I
find on
would
the
think
board.
I would think Zion Young because I didn't expect him to be there. I had, he was expected to be late first, early second to get for him to fall at 45. Just watching him fall, and that, as Dev said, when you look at the combination of picks, if he's not there, then maybe that discussion's a little different. if I don't know who the next best edge rusher would have been, would have been left on the board at that point, um, but he was clearly the best guy there, and I mean, DaCosta basically said that himself, that was his guy at that point. So there wasn't. I mean, they did wait a little in the first before making the pick. The second, they didn't. I don't think they waited at all. It's like here, throw the card up at
Yeah.
the stage. um, yeah. So I mean, I think that would be. I think that just because I was never expecting to be there.
Yeah,
Before
that's a good point, Brian, about like he was I didn't think there was any lanes for that either. End of first round, bare minimum. Sorry, Tony, but yeah, I just thought of that too.
no, well, let's get your take on what you thought was the best pick, Dev.
Um, it's a yeah, I'm gonna go because it is an interesting question of how do you define best, but I liked Elijah Surratt. Um, I think he is. When I look back, he could have easily gone probably third round territory. Of course, they took Lane, right? But I'm talking about early third. He could have even gone at the end of the second. He was among the top group of receivers. It's just that he's a possession receiver. So his game isn't as I mean the traits aren't as explosive, but I love everything that he brings to the table. And the fact that they got him in the fourth round after they took Lane in the third, it's kind of like if you flip those two, and when it happened, I was like, I don't really love this combination. But I'm sorry, I didn't love Lane. But then when they took Surratt, and then I was able to look at that and think, yeah, if you flip those two, I mean, it totally works. So, but Surratt's a clean player, like just he's going to come in. He's almost at a pro level already, playing college, playing with different quarterbacks. So I think that's my favorite, like the best pick. I think they just got for pound, quality value. I would put him up there.
You look at that, and a lot of people have said what you just said, that they could have flipped those two guys in 3 and 4, and maybe you're a little bit happier. But at the end of the day, they're on your team, so who cares when? But
Right.
I think it's interesting when you take a guy like Lane, who didn't really project as a third round on most through by most prognosticators, that you wonder sometimes if what a team is trying to build. What's the team that they're trying to build on this? What's this offense going to look like? And who are the pieces that are going to fall into what that offense is going to gel into? Maybe that Lane was a guy that Doyle liked a little better for what he wants to do. And then when Surratt was still available in the fourth round, they were more than happy to take him too. So you never know what these teams are trying to do. Like, and we'll get into the other picks too, like the fifth round, the tight ends. They moved up to get, what was it, Higby?
Was it Hibner?
Hibner.
Hibner, yeah.
Yeah.
They moved up to get him, and people didn't think he was anything more than a fifth round, maybe even a sixth round pick, but maybe he
Yeah.
fits what they're trying to do. So a player might be more valuable to one team than another based upon what they're trying to schematically do and the players that they want to draft. And then at the same time, another team will say, well, that was a reach because he doesn't fit our scheme. He doesn't fit what we're trying to do. So I think some of that is in play throughout the draft, and why some guys I think fall and some guys get picked too early, according to prognosticators.
Well, it's that whole consensus board
Yeah.
discussion. I don't know.
Hmm.
First off, I don't know who makes the consensus board. I don't know who compiles and who decides which boards are the ones to look at. But I maybe it was DaCosta when he did his thing, the lounge thing. But he because he got into that a little bit. But as you said, every team has different needs. Every scouting crew looks at things differently. And you're right. I mean, this is something different we haven't had in a while because it's been hardball for forever, and he had his needs, and we were not really sure. I mean, we can look at what Johnson did, we can look at Chicago last year, but is that really going to be him, or is that, or was that I'm sorry, Johnson's the head coach there. Doyle, sorry. So can we look at Johnson's offense and say that's what Doyle's going to run, or does Doyle have his own ideas? So,
Mhm.
I think that comes into play, especially when you're looking at the receivers and the tight ends.
Now, I'm going to use this term worst pick, but I mean relatively speaking. I'm not saying that any of these picks that the Ravens have made are bad picks. Time will tell. It's certainly too early to say whether they were great picks, good picks, or bad picks. But of the picks that they made, and we'll start with you this time, Dev, which was the worst?
Can I come up with well, let me do a little bit of a hedge.
You
I
want to
wasn't a
qualify, don't you?
yeah, I want to qualify this one. I didn't love Josh Cuevas uh, in terms of it's not so much him, the game, his game. I think his game does actually complement Hibner, who they took earlier, and Mark Andrews pretty well. And if you look at Durham Smythe as well, the things that he brings to the table, he is more of a blocking tight end. He's got some upside on that front, and that is something they're going to really need in the offense. So it's not so much the type of tight end, but just not getting a center at all. We'll see how that plays out, and I know that we're going to talk about that in a bit, but I kind of wasn't crazy about that. And if they did decide instead of taking him and they went signed like, Njoku or some other tight end in free agency, I could have been okay with that. So again, it's not so much the prospect and his upside or his talent, but just the situation more than anything.
What was the biggest surprise? We'll stay with you right now, Dev. Biggest surprise in the draft. And it doesn't have to be of
Obviously,
the picks, but what's the biggest surprise that either did or didn't happen for the Ravens on draft weekend?
I'm gonna go with Jacoby Lane because I was pretty surprised when they took him in the third round. And I thought that's another place where I mean there's some good D tackle. I think there's some good D linemen on the board if I remember. Although I thought receiver was in play at that point, it's just not him that was the receiver I thought. And actually, it was Bell who I liked a lot at that point. Chris Bell, who Miami ended up taking, and he had the ACL tear. And if he didn't, he's an early second round pick, easy. Kind of like Anquan Bolden, baby Anquan Bolden or Anquan Bolden 2.0. Like can't get separation, but really good physical. After the catch, he's tough. So, but Lane, guys, has really grown on me since, and I really like the pick a lot. I love his traits, the things he brings to the table physically. Um, there's not guys that grow on. It's that old adage of like you can't find players like that grow on trees or whatever that saying is. So it's like the things he had physically, the gifts he has, you're just not going to be able to find that. So it was surprising, but now in retrospect, and you make a great point, Tony. Like we also don't know the coach's view on this. And Kerry Colbert, who's the former coach at USC, played at USC, and the connection he has with Lane. Then we find out from DaCosta that former players called about Lane. Todd Heap coached Lane's son. Like all these connections come up, and all of these former players, Steve Smith's another like they've just
It's real
raved
high
and
on,
raved
yeah.
about. Yeah, like his ability. Des Bryant's another former Raven, I guess. So it's just if you look at the book of all those things plus the traits and I think it makes a ton of sense now. At the time, it didn't make as much sense to me.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dev kind of covered. I mean, the biggest surprise I think is not getting a center because I think we all assumed that was going to happen. But I've also put Lane. Lane is obviously such the boomer bust. Um, if he turns out to be what they feel he's going to be, he could be, he could be the best receiver they've ever drafted. Who knows? I mean, but or he could be done in 2 years. He could be the
Yeah.
guy we're looking back at saying he's the only reason he's still on the team because he was a third round pick 3 years ago or something like 2 years ago or something like that. So that was, I think, that both of the biggest surprise and I don't know that worst pick, but just again, the range for him is so, it's one end of the spectrum to the other, I think. So, and you kind of like, I don't know. I kind of did with the third round pick. I want to hit a double or a triple. I don't, so to speak, and that he's either a home run or a strikeout. So, probably. So, who knows? But that would be just because in the third, and as you said earlier, maybe if you switch he and Surratt around and he's the fourth round pick, I'm not feeling that same way. Who knows?
When I hear picks like this, and I'm watching it happen on draft weekend. I wonder what goes on in the minds of these guys in that war room because they come out of left field, some of these picks. And the Ravens seem to do like one of these every draft. The one that pops in my mind just off the top of my head is Brandon Stevens. When they drafted him, a guy who was a running back, then he was a
Yep.
cornerback. He switched schools and they draft him as a defensive back, and all of a sudden he's a corner in the NFL. And they thought maybe he was going to be a safety, maybe he was being a corner, ended up being a corner. It's guys like that you know we don't hear a lot about, but I always defer to their intelligence, their professionalism, their knowledge of the game, and their knowledge of all these players and the connections you just mentioned, Dev. And I'll say, okay, I'll just sit back and wait and see. But I wonder
Yeah.
sometimes you see a Tez Walker out there. When are they going to give this guy a chance? Every time you give him a chance, he seems to produce something, but they don't give him a chance. Maybe this new regime thinks of him as more of a special teams kind of guy. I don't know, but as it turns out, just in like your guy Bateman, Dev, what's going to happen
Yeah.
with him now? So it's
I'm on the record as saying I love the guy, but if he loses his job this year and they don't keep him next year, that's a definite path. But you're right. The new coaching staff is a major wild card in all this. Like they have no commitments coming in. They may just feel differently. I would not be surprised if and he should take it as a wake up call. I think the word has been out that he likes Doyle, he likes the offense, Bateman that is, but we'll see. He has real competition. Surratt lame to an extent, but I think Surratt really is the guy. He could jump in, start. He was projected to start anyway, from a lot of the draft analysts. So yeah, watch your back.
I want to jump into the undrafted free agents. There's with 19 of them that the Ravens signed,
hmm But
and
they cut one already.
right,
Oh,
and and
I missed
so
that one.
you get some of these guys, and some of them look like I think there were a couple that were projected to be fourth or fifth round picks, and they went undrafted. Any of them intrigue you to the point where if you're going out there to training camp to watch them practice, you're going to dial into these guys because there's something about them that you think could be special, and the Ravens could have found a real steal because we know their history, which have been like 22 out of the last 23 years or something like that, that they've actually the final 53 included an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is more Dev's arena than mine for sure. But the one guy I thought, and he may not have a great chance to make the team this year, but he's definitely a practice squad candidate. But Diego Pons from Mississippi, offensive
Yeah.
tackle, has full left tackle experience. Now, I don't know if his abilities truly translate to left tackle in the NFL, but looking, a year or two down the road. That's a guy, and he was a guy that I think was probably projected to go fourth or fifth round, and obviously fell for some reason, and maybe that's because he can't be a left tackle in the NFL. I don't know, but that's a guy that I kind of had my eye on. We're doing all those mock drafts before the draft. He was always there and was a guy I seemed to pick a lot thinking about a tackle. So, and maybe that's why it's in my brain. But I think he's a guy that. But I'll be interested to see because the guys like that get a lot of third and fourth quarters of preseason games he's gonna see a lot of action, so we're gonna get a chance to see a lot of him. So that's a guy that intrigues me. Um, I mean, obviously, just because Nick Dawkins is the center from PSU, just because there's a need there, and maybe they can. And I mean, they've found a lot of maybe not great centers, but they've had a lot of starting centers come from the sixth round and undrafted free agents, whether it's Matt Skura or Makari or the big redheaded kid
Ryan
from
Jensen.
yeah, Jensen from Colorado State, and then Bozeman was also I think he was a sixth round pick. So I mean they found those guys not necessarily immediate, but that's kind of been their way, and we'll just hope that Ledford can coach these guys up. So maybe Dawkins is a guy that again maybe not this year, but he could be a guy that like those other guys that in the second or third year, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this guy's not so bad.
Yeah, those are honestly the two guys I thought of. I'll also throw a wild card as Webb's kid. I don't know in terms of like the room if he has a good shot because they at this point really I think have built up a deep cornerback room. But as a practice squad player, just given the lineage and what Ladarius Webb brought right in terms of his intelligence, the savvy, like he overperformed or outperformed his prospect, kind of like coming in. So his prospect profile. So his son could be the same way, and I think that's one to look out for. But yeah, we getting back real quick to Dawkins. That's probably my choice for the guy that will make the team. To Brian's point, there's a pretty clear path, and again, yeah, they've had good success with centers that they found. Going way back is Mike Flynn, of course. And like
Right.
you could just go. I mean, that's kind of and that's a whole nother and I know we're going to talk about center, but that's like another intrigue into this is like, are they going to go back to that process? It seems like it on paper with the guard investments. So, but the and Venga being teammates part is also really interesting because they already have some chemistry, right? So I think really would not be surprised if he A makes the team and B is in the mix to push for a job, depending on again how he translates to the NFL and like all the typical caveats.
Yeah. Tony, real quick, not that this necessarily always factors in, but the guaranteed money that the undrafted free agents got, if that measures who they liked the most, of course, it could measure who they liked and who they got into a bidding war with. But the Aaron Graves, the defensive tackle from Iowa, got 60 grand are guaranteed, so that's the biggest. Um, Silas Walters, Miami of Ohio safety, got 50 grand in fully guaranteed money. And again, Pounds got 40 grand. So, and everybody else is much smaller. Ethan Burke from Texas got 20 grand, and everybody else is smaller than that. So if that mean I don't know if that means anything. I know last year I think the guy that they gave the most guaranteed money with didn't make it through. Basically, got cut the day after mini camp. So it doesn't always mean anything, but that's just I always find that interesting because that seemingly says who they think has the best chance.
Now that we're on the topic of UDFAs, Brian, if you could real quickly talk about these 3-year contracts. Suddenly, when you saw these tweets, Ravens sign this quarterback and that quarterback to a 3-year deal, and Ravens fans are looking at that saying, well, what are they doing? And first of all, it's all about the guaranteed money, but the 3-year deal is something that really hasn't been described or attached to a UDFA in the past, but suddenly it became attached to UDFAs. Explain for you, if you could, to the audience what is happening there and why that's not an exception
Yeah.
to the norm.
That's undrafted free agents. The guys signed right after the draft always have gotten 3-year deals. Or I shouldn't say always. I mean, if you go back into the early 2000s, they didn't. But for the once the rookie wage scale came in, so that was 2011. They've always gotten 3-year deals. So that's nothing new. I mean, it doesn't mean anything because it's 3 years at the minimum each year. So it's the lowest salary possible. And then they'll get a little signing bonus and maybe some guaranteed base salary. The Ravens don't go wild on the guaranteed base salary. 25,000 is the most. There are some teams that I don't remember who it was, but I remember seeing 300,000 they gave. Now those have offsets in them. So if you're on the practice squad and you earn 25,000, then that's that. If you go to a different team, then the Ravens gets credited back to the Ravens cap the following year. But so yeah, so I don't know what. Well, I think Pavia was the one that obviously was and that the bunch of the media were announcing that it was they'd signed him to a 3-year deal. Well, the devil's in the details. There's no guaranteed money. There's no signing bonus. So it is basically 3 years of minimum salaries. So it means nothing. So they could cut him. They could have cut him the day after the mini camp, and it didn't mean anything. And cutting most of these guys is going to mean anything anyway, because again, the guaranteed money is so minor compared to a $300 million cap. But yeah, so I mean, it's always been that way. I don't know. I mean, it's just carrying the water for the agents. It makes it sound a little better, I guess. But it means nothing, and it's always been that way. And it just and again, I just think it is kind of funny because remember Pavia, they just said he was going to get an invite, a tryout invite, and then they said, okay, well, we're going to sign him, and then but those explanations did not say anything about a signing bonus or anything. So I was really curious once the numbers came out to see if he did get anything, and actually neither quarterback did. Of course, they both were again tryout basis, and then so I don't know what I mean. They had to have quarterbacks for minicamp, I guess. So they had to get somebody in. So they just signed them to deals. But now if they got hurt, then they would be stuck on the hook for the rookie minimum. So that'd be 800 grand. So you got to be careful there, or almost 900 grand. But obviously, that's the only time they would see any money if they got hurt.
I almost thought that all these quarterbacks that they've signed over the last week and a half is an indication that Lamar's not interested in coming to anything that's not a mandatory OTA.
Yeah, that could be that bringing in the veteran, the second veteran. That could be not that Thompson's much of a veteran in a way, but I guess he has started a few games. But that could well be for sure. Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that a guy like Diego Pavia is a guy who signs with the Ravens for next to no money, if any money. And what are his chances? I wouldn't. I would think he might want to go to a team that's really struggling at that position and try to light up the scoreboard in preseason and see where let the chips fall where they might.
Yeah, the only thought I had is they didn't draft the quarterback. They didn't have, so they don't, there is a possibility of a developmental quarterback that could be a backup because Tyler Huntley signed a 2-year deal, Brian. I can't
Yeah.
remember,
Mhm.
but he's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. So this is a fair point, Tony, that what are the odds of you ever seeing the field? Probably not very good, but maybe he's looking at it realistically to be a backup in this league. The other possibility is, training. I mean, practice. Sorry, the preseason games. So just putting some tape out there, and he's going to get playing time. So at some point, he will get a chance, whether it's being a backup here over the long haul, or he feels like I'm going to do enough, and somebody's going to have interest in me from another team. The only thing I can think of.
And before we go any further, guys, I want to drop in a note on our one of our best sponsors, Jimmy Seafood. Jimmy's Famous Seafood is legendary, not only for their amazing cuisine that includes crabs, award-winning crab cakes, sushi, mouth-watering steaks, the list goes on, but they are also legendary for their events that include player shows, concerts, and unforgettable tailgating experiences. There's a reason that NFL Network, ESPN, and Fox News all talk about Jimmy's. Find out why the famous is so famous at jimmysfamousseafood.com. Okay, a couple other developments with the Ravens. One of which, one of my favorite guys that I had hoped would come back last year did not, but he's back in the fold. I think he's a great mentor for a lot of these young players and just a good guy to have on the sidelines. Calais Campbell, he's back with the Ravens. He hasn't officially signed his deal yet, has he, Brian?
No, there was a report. I can't remember who said it, but it might have been Jeff Rebeck that he was expected in this week to sign and take his physical, and so yeah, so he should be signed up soon.
Did someone say
So
physical? No.
Yeah, yeah, he'll pass.
Yeah, I
So
think
when you
so.
think about a guy like Calais, his physicality, he's a tough guy to take on one because of the way he's built and what he knifes through the gaps. What would you call him, like a three tech, Dev?
Yeah, he's a three tech at this point. He used to be a five tech,
Right.
play base, and he's a five tech, and he can still give that to you. He's a four tech, and he's a one tech. He can give you the one tech. So that's if you want to play around with different looks. But yeah, he's still very, very productive pass rusher. So just look at he was one of the top five most double teamed defensive tackles in the league, and then for being double teamed as much as he was double teamed, he had one of the highest pressure rates in the league. He had one of the best win rates in the league. And then you look at the way that the Cardinals used him. Um, Not only you line him up in these positions, but then you can move him inside. You can run some stunts. So all of those things are really conducive to what Jesse Minter likes to do with his defense. So he's just a really good fit, and he's still a good run defender, so you don't lose anything there. I like the fact that at this stage in his career, um, on paper at least, he can probably just play the snaps you need him to play. But given the depth and some of the injury concerns that the Ravens have on the front line, maybe he can pick up more, right? So it's just at his age, he just doesn't seem he seems he's still durable. He's still able to give really productive snaps. Like, it's just I think a really nice fit all around.
Well, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that your coach one player play off another, and when you got a guy like Calais Campbell who does, as you mentioned, a bunch of different things. If Nnamdi Madubuike comes back, Travis Jones, who really accelerated in his growth, I thought the second half of 2025, and then you got a couple of guys on the edge with Hendrickson and a young Green, and now uh, the rookie whose name escapes me, right, Young.
That was a Zion,
Yeah.
Zion Young, yeah.
So with all those guys and even Tavius Robinson, there's a lot of talent that they can mix and match in there, and that gives a guy like Minter, who's a creative guy, a lot of different combinations because of the complementary nature of these players.
Yeah, he's got to be licking his chops. I'm licking my chops, just like this is a dream scenario. And the thing that's interesting, as you pointed out, is I mean, between Green and Hendrickson, those two are probably going to stay on the edge and they're not going to move around as much. But like, man, everybody else has some position versatility, and you can move Zion Young inside to rush. You can move Tavius inside to rush. You can obviously do that with Campbell, but you can also move Campbell outside. So it's just all of a sudden it's a dynamic group in which he can, and then you don't even. This isn't even thinking about how can you use Kyle Hamilton from a dime look or something like that, right? So bringing the corners and defense backs down. So it's just a great on paper. Everything looks really promising, and I know that the key to this is Madubuike's health. But guys, even if let's say there's a scenario where he might have to be on the pup list or something to start, like I think they've really done a nice job of like fortifying things, even if you don't factor him in. So that's just a real, yeah. The group is very exciting to me. One of the best, and I think I was thinking about this. Like you'd have to probably go back to 2018 um, in terms of depth, quality, and I think this group on paper, I think this group can trump that group. Just if there's an unknown with Matabike, but if he's healthy, I think this group trumps that group. And then now you're going back to like 2014 and some of these other groups that were really deep on the front. So exciting, and I think they'll be able to up the pass rush big time.
Brian, can you talk a little bit about obviously Namdi wants to come back and play. He's working out like a beast. We've seen all the videos, but let's say it doesn't work out. What are the cap implications if he comes back, he practices, and it just doesn't work out for whatever reason? His surgeons were wrong, and this thing is flaring up again, and he's back to square one.
Yeah, I mean, for this year, probably since they're seemingly going into the year with, fingers crossed that he's going to play, they don't really need cap space now, to create from him. He and his salary is fully guaranteed. So you're really at this point just looking at, from a cap perspective, you're more focused on 27 and what they can do then. Um, if he were to have to retire again. He says he won't do that till the season's over because his money's fully guaranteed, and that's why players. This is exactly why players fight for fully guaranteed money because football's a violent sport and these kind of things can happen. Um, so they'll look at 27 and then try to spread that. It's still a big number. I think it's about. I'm going to say it's about. I haven't looked at it in a bit, but I think it's about 30 million in dead money still to deal with next year. So they would probably have him retire after June 1st or just release him if he truly can't play. That doesn't really matter if he retires or they just release him because you don't want to release a player and player turn and go, oh yeah, I can play after all. I'm going to go somewhere else. But in his case, that would probably be unlikely. So they would either have him, and they would probably use a post June 1 to spread that out over 27 and 28. So, yeah, not ideal, but obviously, I wrote that article back in what, January, I guess it was. It's still on the site and it lays all these things out, the different permutations. But thankfully, it looks like, we're going to get hopefully something out of him. And, as Dev said, maybe he starts on PUP to start the season and then he's by they get to the, mid-season, you bring him in and then the defense, if they're hopefully already good, and then adding that ace level player, hopefully by then will be pretty amazing.
Staying with defensive tackle, the interior defensive line, a guy that you used to get some things from him. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes he seems engaged. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he's hurt. He's kind of a chameleon, Broderick Washington. And, he's a guy who he had Achilles injury last year, correct?
Yeah,
And
something like, yeah.
yes,
And then,
so he hasn't been cleared to play, I don't believe yet. But
yeah, yeah.
how does that work, Brian, in terms of, if the Ravens do have it that they want to let him go, what do they have to see happen in order to do that in a copacetic way?
Right. Now, if my understanding is he has been working out at the facility, but I don't know that he's actually touched, well, I haven't really had any that much on-field work yet. I don't think he's done any on-field work per se. Um, and there's a thing called the injury protection benefit. So you can release a player who was injured. You can't release a player during the season that he's hurt. You have to continue to pay, or you work out an injury settlement. But you can't just cut him and say we don't owe you anything. And that's why there are grievances when you see, occasionally you see grievances because team cuts a player and they say he's healthy, and the player says I wasn't healthy. So. But a player who was injured the prior year, you can cut, and there's no possibility for a grievance in that case. However, if the player cannot play the following season, now that's kind of a nebulous, can he play or not? But if he can't play, then he's entitled to what's called the injury protection benefit, which is $2 million. So if they cut Washington, it's 4 million in savings. But if he can't play and he claims the injury protection benefit, then that eats up half of that cap savings. So what you want, and this has happened before with some guys. Kyle Arrington was a guy, I think he was concussions, and he wasn't cleared. I mean, I don't think we all expect him to be cut, but I don't think it was cut till like August because he finally could pass a physical at that point. The concussions were so bad. So if Washington can pass the physical, then if they intend to cut him, and we obviously don't know that, but for sure. But if they do intend to cut him, then they want him to pass the physical because then there's no way he can make the injury protection benefit claim. So that's been my theory all along is what they're waiting for. Now, obviously, his former defensive line coach is now the defensive coordinator. Maybe they feel maybe the coaching staff has this coaching staff has a different feel for him. Harbaugh seemed to be. I mean, Harbaugh being Harbaugh, granted, but he doesn't like injury questions anyway, but he seemed to tire of questions regarding Washington's status. And sometimes that seems to be his own frustration coming through in his answers. So not just the question, but his frustration with the player. So now maybe Washington has a clean slate with his coaching staff and there to keep him around. It's going to be a tough room. right now because you've got the rookie drafted last or the rookie from this past year. You got Benny this year. You've got Washington. You got Campbell now. You have Jones. You have Madubuike. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody, but
Yeah.
Peoples,
so I'm sorry.
Aeneas Peoples.
Yeah, people's from right. So,
Yeah.
and what they usually carry five, and they've probably got and Okoye who plays
Okoye was the
decently
other one.
enough. Yeah, he
Then
plays
they've got
decent.
Jenkins too.
Oh, right,
Uh,
there it is. Yeah.
yeah, so they're loaded, and that is a fair point. It's it. I wonder too because I thought about that as well as far as the connection with Weaver and in that Washington played his best football in 2023, right? So his best, and that was under McDonald's scheme. And then you look at what Minter's bringing. So I think schematically, there's also a chance that he could do a lot better, and that's something they might be looking at. And it also Madubuike's health it could factor into
Yeah,
the
for sure.
decision. So just maybe they'd rather be overloaded on the defensive line with all these reinforcements because of Madubuike.
Yeah, and they don't, it's not like they need the cap space right now. So it could come down to, late August and everybody, hopefully, fingers crossed, everybody's healthy. Matabike is going to play. And now we don't need Washington and we'll save the $4 million and put that in the bank for trade, to have for trade deadline, something like that. So, I mean, that's
Yeah.
probably the best case scenario.
All right, guys, got a few more topics I want to touch on, but before we do, I want to take a time out to deliver a message from LifeMed. Feeling tired, stressed, or not like yourself? At LifeMed Institute, they help you take control of your health with personalized wellness, hormone therapy, weight loss solutions, and regenerative medicine designed for real results. Their expert team focuses on helping you feel energized, confident, and healthy again. Don't just live, thrive. Schedule your consultation today at LifeMed Institute and start becoming the best version of you. Okay, Broderick Washington touched on him. Another interesting topic, Brian. We just learned that the Ravens this week that the Ravens signed all of their draft picks except one, Zion Young. Remind our audience again, me too. Why is it that these second round picks are so problematic, not just for the Ravens, but across the league?
Yeah. So, yeah, and I mean, I saw, you know, uh, people all over X that just like, why isn't he signed? They signed everybody. Is it gonna hold out? He's not gonna hold out. It'll get done. And it'll get done probably well before training camp. So when the rookie wage scale was put in originally, I'm gonna say only the top 10 picks probably got fully guaranteed deals. But then over the years, pick 11, the next year, pick 11 and 12 got fully guaranteed. And it just continued to progress that way. And then it got to the end of the first round. And then the question was going to be, well, what's going to happen? Is it going to continue into the second round? And I think for at least 1 year, the teams held off on that. And then 2 years ago, the first pick only in the second round got fully guaranteed. Last year, eight picks got first eight picks in the second round got fully guaranteed. Well, Young is picked 13 of the second round. So it's going to be a while because his agent, or they're going to wait to see if those picks, nine through 12 in front of him, if they're going to get fully guaranteed. Nobody really wants to be pick 13 and say the Ravens don't want to pick 13 and say we'll get fully guaranteed, and the four teams in front of them are like, wait a minute, we didn't want to go there yet this year. So and honestly, it's not, I mean, if it's not fully guaranteed, it's one of those. I understand you got to draw lines in negotiations and things, but because I pay attention to this stuff, but it's silly because the difference is he going to get 97% fully guaranteed or 100% fully guaranteed? What's the real difference? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if you do have to cut him after a couple years, it's not gonna affect your cap that much, but it's part of the game between teams and agents in the PA, and neither side wants to give up too much, so it'll get done. That bottom line, it'll get done. I don't know how many people I responded to. Don't worry about it. It'll get done. It's just like, don't worry about it. It'll get done. So, yeah, so that's what that is. So it'll be interesting to see if it does reach pick 13, whether 8 was a real stretch. And I'm trying to think. Houston, I think, was like picked like fifth in the round and they went fully guaranteed. So they jumped the shark. So the teams in front of them were like, oh, well, we got to go fully guaranteed. And then it was a question of how many teams after, and a couple teams after ended up giving fully guaranteed, and those players got it. So we'll see if it stretches to pick 13. But again, it'll get done. It's nothing to worry about at all.
They'll get 96.25% fully
I mean, it's
guaranteed.
crazy. Yeah. I mean,
Just
I mean, can you imagine fighting over if you're not going to if he's not going to get fully guaranteed? Because, okay, well, the pick last year got 97.6. We want 97.9, and the team's like, no, well, we'll give you, I mean, it's crazy. It is kind of just very
Yeah.
silly at that point.
Yeah, we talked about combinations on the defensive line. I want to talk about combinations on the offensive line. One of the Ravens free agent signings, which really underwhelmed me, but maybe you could talk me down from the ledge a little bit, is John Simpson. And now that Wenga's on board, they're looking, or maybe they already know who the center is going to be. We just don't know it, or maybe they have some eyes on other players. But having Wenger on board, having John Simpson on board, having Emory Jones, who came into last year's draft with a bit of promise, but he was dealing with that, I think, his shoulder injury that he came into the draft with. Now he's going to be fully healthy. What kind of combinations do you expect? And who, in your opinion, might be the clubhouse leader if nothing is done outside of the guys they've got signed at center? Who's the clubhouse leader to have that position?
Yeah, I think John Simpson getting to the ledge and how he might factor in. I think it's a good fit. Um, I do think it's a lot better with Venga being drafted, though. I mean, it was if that was their big move and big solve for guard, that wouldn't have worked for me. But yeah, now it's looking pretty good because Simpson and Venga really up the tenacity, physicality for this group in the run game in particular. Simpson is he gets after it. You can't really accuse him for not being a dog and a mauler in the run game. So is he clean in pass pro? Not as much so, and he does have a lot of penalties. I mean, that's kind of what you get with him. He's
Mm-hmm.
28 years old, so you're not going to be able to. I mean, there is a chance, of course, that Coach Ledford could work with him and get some of this technique stuff cleaned up so he doesn't have as many penalties. But I think he's an above. I think he's about a above average guard or average guard that could be elevated in this scheme. But with Simpson and Venga, I think it gets back to I'm just theorizing that their thought was we're going to really elevate the guard play, and that could help our center because now you have this group of it's like a combination of, I mean, you have Corey Bullock, who's been on the team now. He's going to his third year. And then you have, we talked about Dawkins, who's an undrafted free agent. And then you got Danny Pinter, who they signed, career backup. And I think it's Jonathan Gwynn from Atlanta, but he's intriguing. He's an athlete, but again, another guy that hasn't played. He hasn't really established himself as a starter. So they're clearly looking at it to me as saying, if we had to play a game today, which is also the other part. I mean, there's a lot of offseason left, but can we trot out one of these guys to play center because our guards are much better? I think that's a pretty sound way of doing it. If I had two that I like right now in terms of that center group. One is mentioned Bullock, backup last year to Linderbaum, so he's got the reps. He's got the trust of at least the front office. We don't know what the coaching staff feels about him. He's got the size. He's about, whereas Linderbaum lost a lot of those physical battles. It's probably one of the biggest knocks on him. I think Bullock, physically 320 pounds, he could technically like stand up to the bigger defensive tackles in the AFC North. So he got that going for him. But athletically, I don't think he's as good. Definitely not as good as Linderbaum, but like just in general, his athleticism is what I'm concerned about with the switch to more zone-based blocking, which is what Coach Letford and Doyle in combination will probably they'll definitely ratchet that up a lot. So And then Pinter is interesting, guys, because um, he has a couple of starts to his name. But the other thing is from Colts analysts that I've followed on X, they've said good things about him. And when he's played, he's been able to hold his own. He is competent. Maybe he is your Makari or we mentioned Skura. Like just he's a good enough center. He can give you average play at the position, and maybe he needs more opportunities. Also, kind of reminds me a little bit of like Sam Mustipher, who they had 2 years ago. That type of in that category. So those are the guys I like to kind of as far as the front runners. But part of me still thinks, and Brian, this is I don't know what you think about it, but like I still think they've got to be on the lookout for a trade. There's not really much I mean, in terms of signing a center that's out there. So I don't know if there's trade avenues that they could take, bring in another veteran.
Yeah, I mean they've got some flexibility. They can go get somebody. Now they're not going to get a guy making 15 million a year, but if they can bring a guy in in the 5 million a year range, they can probably make that. They can probably swing that, and then obviously you use void years and things like that to spread it out. Whether there's that guy out there, I think I agree with Deb. I'm sure they're looking, and I think they'll continue to look. And that's always been one of the I always one of the strong suits of the Ravens front office is it seems like, um, and obviously we focus more on the Ravens, so maybe every team is this good, but it always seems like they have a list of guys they anticipate being cut and they're ready to pounce once that happens. So, or trade. So, I think they'll certainly continue to look that direction. Now maybe, somebody, in training camp, I mean, OTAs is hard because there's not a lot of, it's less physical. But obviously, once you get to training camp and preseason games, that's going to go a long way towards deciding if it is one of the three or four who it's going to be.
Brian just made me think of a question about Calais Campbell's contract and what you expect his contract to look like. But before we get to that, I want to take a minute to recognize another one of our fine sponsors, Royal Farms. Royal Farms is your go-to place day or night for breakfast, lunch, snacks, dinner, fuel, and all the things you need. Since 1959, Royal Farms has satisfied the Mid-Atlantic's hunger for real fresh food served real fast, including their world-famous Royal Farms chicken, which is often paired with hand-cut Western fries. Rofo also features custom-built hot and cold subs, sandwiches, and wraps. And don't forget their 100% Colombian coffee, always brewed fresh. Seek out and enjoy the freshness of Royal Farms. It's guaranteed. Okay, bro, I just want to get back to that Calais Campbell contract situation. Seems like it's 1 year, $5 or $5.5 million. Do you expect that to have option years?
Yeah, I think it will probably will. They don't have a lot of cap. I mean, they've got based on my effective cap space, they have about 9 million before Campbell.
Okay.
So they could take the whole five, but if they and obviously if they think there's an option of somebody like that, I still have this. We've already talked about defensive line, but I think bringing Clowney would be like the absolute icing on the cake for that defensive line would be just incredible. Now I'm not sure who goes if you do that, but whether they feel that would make sense. But so I mean I think they have another move, whether it's a guy like that or whether it is a center. So I think they've got another move, but I mean the only real place they can make substantial cap space, and keep in mind, I don't know. Maybe that ship has sailed, but I still have my fingers crossed that somehow they get Lamar done before the season, which will take up cap space. So they're going to have to create cap space. But Madubuike is really the only place to get that, and I'm not sure you want to go there now. Now, my thought on that, just as a quick tangent, is Madubuike hopefully is healthy and playing well mid-season. Then you can restructure him. It's half of what it would still create about 8 million, but that's a great amount for a trade deadline. So that's something they can have in their back pocket. And again, that's fingers crossed he's healthy and playing well, and they feel comfortable with doing that. I wouldn't do it now. So they've got some flexibility, but it's not great. But I mean, if I think anybody you're just going to swing, you're not getting Pro Bowl center in a trade at this point. You're getting a guy in the $3 to $5 million range probably,
Yeah.
and they can swing that.
You said there's about 9 million in effective cap space. For our audience, if you could define or expand upon what you mean by effective cap space.
Sure, sure. So right now they have about 22 to 23 million in cap space.
And that's what they're
Um,
going to see from all these other sites, right?
that's what you'll see. But effective cap space is taking into account their future expenses. And I say this every January and February leading up to free agency and things like that. Once free agency starts, I have to reiterate it because, you look at, the Ravens had what, 40 some million at one point. Oh, that's great. We got 40 million to spend. Well, you don't, because your practice squad cost you about $5 million. You have to carry money into the season because when injuries happen, you have to have cap space to sign replacements as guys go on IR. So that, I mean, can vary year to year. Hopefully it's very little, but some years it could be 10 million. So I generally use six for that number. And then you have your practice squad elevation. So when you add all those together, and of course we're pretty much through and I always include the draft picks, but we're pretty much through them at this point, except for Zion Young. So that's about 13 million. So you take the 22 minus the 13, and you're about 9 million. So that the effective cap space is what the extra or excess maybe cap space they have over and above the future expenses.
That's what's left on the credit card.
Yes. Yes.
So
Okay.
it's like the budget,
Yeah.
effect, like the spend, yeah, whatever the spend. Well, no, it's like the after taxes income. Any analogy you want to bring, and my wife explains them all to me because she's the finance person. So yeah.
One guy we didn't talk about, and he had an interesting tweet this week. He was
Oh
he was
God.
tweeting back and forth with Tony Jefferson, former Raven, former Charger, and I think he's a former Charger. I don't think the Chargers kept him, did they?
I think he's back with the Chargers.
Sign.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. All right. So
yeah,
a
he did.
current Charger. At the end of the exchange, Marlon made it seem like he's unemployed. And it made me think, do they have some sort of agreement in place with him that he's going to take a salary or going to take a pay cut after June 1st? And my mind started going in different directions, but there's a place where they can find some cap space with Marlon Humphreys, right? Marlon.
Yeah, and I honestly thought they would have by now. So, and maybe that's still in the works, because he's set to make 20 million in cash this year, and I don't know that
Really
his
not worth that.
play is where and I don't, when you heard him speak at the end of the season, I don't think he thought he was worth it either. Um,
I
you
think you're right.
know, I mean, he's a pretty good, you know, I mean, on the field, he might throw his hands up in the air and blame somebody else, but he's, at times, and sometimes I'm sure he's right too. But when he talks to the press, he's pretty straightforward, and he'll take the blame. So, now they did have he did have a $4 million roster bonus that was due in March. We never know if those are paid or not, so I'm assuming it was, but they could have put that off. But there's no reason for him to, unless he knows he's going to be here. And if he knows he's going to be here and he knows he's taking a pay cut, then he would have done it already. Because the longer if it hasn't been decided, he's lost his opportunity to hit the market when every teams are more flush in cap space. So there's no reason for him to wait, and that's why his deal had a $4 million roster bonus, because it generally forces the team to make a decision the first week of free agency and not drag him out till later. Post June 1 doesn't really matter for him because this is the last year of his deal, so they're not waiting for June 1 for that reason either. Um, whether they would just do a straight pay cut, whether they would do that by reduce his number by adding a more reasonable year next year, that would actually help because he's got a decent amount of void year money on his deal for next year. That could spread it out an extra year, or two. So I still think something's going to happen, but I also thought Broderick Washington would have been gone by now. So what do I know?
Well, maybe it's because they haven't had to use that money, Brian, and they've just decided to sit on these aces in the hole until they have to use them.
Yeah, but I still can't think he's getting 20 million in cash. So
No, no, that
that's got to be fixed one way or another. And I can't
Yeah.
imagine, like I said, now he doesn't have an agent, granted, right? I think he's one of the ones that doesn't have an
Yeah, he
agent.
doesn't have an
So,
agent.
so maybe he's not thinking so well as far as, an agent would be like, no, we're getting this deal done yesterday. And he's like, yeah, we'll get it done eventually. I know they'll treat me right. And, I don't think he's that stupid, but who knows.
well, just
That would
for the benefit of the audience, what Marlowe said he posted a tweet of this huge breakfast, and Tony Jefferson commented, "Bro, don't you have to go to practice?" And he's go, "Where are you? Where have you been? I'm unemployed." And that's how they left the conversation.
Yeah,
that
So
would be,
Marlowe being Marlowe, you never
I
know.
think
But
that's probably the answer. Yeah.
and I think from a roster build perspective, yeah, he had a bad season last year, and I wrote about this in secondary piece I did, but I still think there is a lot of value, and I think he fits some of the things that Minter would want from the DBs. There was that analysis that Rod Woodson had on his technique being changed up, which I thought was just phenomenal. That's why Rod's one of
Mhm.
the best. Like he talked about how what was it where he I was placing his hand on the hip of the receiver and they changed it and you didn't really know why. So I just think between Minter and and Mickens being such great DB secondary savant coaches. Like I think that plus what Marlowe brings his game familiarity, of course, having had Mentor as his coach. But again, I don't have any information, but it's more behind the scenes. I think, and also what they did in the draft. Like yeah, they drafted Chandler Rivers, who could do a lot of the things that they might want from Marlon, but if they did get rid of Marlon, they better have a good kind of replacement already in mind. And I just don't. I think they need him. They don't need him at that dollar amount, but I think it wouldn't have made a ton of sense if they did go that route because I think they need him and the things he brings to the table.
yeah, I think Marlon's going to be a career Raven. They'll figure it out. And as we said before, just him being funny, not having an agent to kind of reel him in, saying things
Yeah.
he says on Twitter. So,
Mhm.
but I have a feeling he's going to be back, and hopefully he'll be back at a comfortable number that everybody can be happy with.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, fellas, that's pretty much does it for this edition of the Front Office. We appreciate you guys listening and checking us out. You can find us on all the social media platforms as well as YouTube. So until next time, we'll check you later.